First of all, welcome again to another exciting rendition of PCOM oversight training. We're going to be able to record this session, which I'm very thankful for, and we'll be posting it up on a YouTube channel that I created today. I will send out a link to that as soon as we are able to get that formatted and posted online. In addition, there will also be included a link in there to a SurveyMonkey set of questions like we did before. The survey is anonymous, so please feel free to answer as honestly as you feel you need to. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. On today's agenda, this is going to be primarily review for everybody. This is some stuff that we did cover at the PCOM training in February. It's also some stuff that we covered at the at least briefly touched on at the RTAC conference in April. So we're going to try and go over as much as we can. These forms, again, it's going to be primarily review for everybody since we've already covered it once before. I'll make it as short and sweet as I possibly can. And as I stated before, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter those questions in the dialog box. And if I can't answer them here during this session, then I will either touch base with you one-on-one offline, or we'll try and answer them in the next session if we feel that that's a more appropriate place. So some of the stuff that we're going to cover today, we did have a couple questions from the previous sessions that have not been answered yet that I thought were relevant to everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and cover those. We're going to cover the Grant Funds Recovery Act form, that's formerly SB 51. This is a quarterly report that has to be submitted with every active grant that we have out there, so we're going to cover that. We're going to cover the quarterly public transportation account reconciliation form and the quarterly service contract revenue form. Now these are identical forms, but they serve the purpose of flowing information to two different sources. We're going to cover both of those forms and how PCOMs are supposed to utilize them, as well as how operators are supposed to utilize them. And then we're going to cover the PCOM quarterly report form. As you'll notice, these are all of the reports that are due every quarter. We do have an annual PCOM report that we're going to cover in a different session, as well as the public transportation service plan that we're going to cover in a different session. Both of those will probably be covered in next session or in the session in December. So if at any point in time, like I said, you have a question on any of that stuff that comes up as you're using the forms, please feel free to reach out to me or your IDOT project manager. First thing we're going to do is the questions from the previous sessions. There were only 2 questions submitted. They were both pretty much about the same issue, so we're going to cover them now. Do you need to submit all complaints or only formal written signed complaints? It's a good question, and the answer to that is please report only on those formal complaints where a documented investigation and resolution has occurred. So obviously if Mary Jo Ryder is complaining that John the driver is driving and braking too fast or turning corners too fast, you're going to want to obviously take some time to talk to the driver and maybe do just a little bit of reconnaissance on that driver to make sure that he or she is driving appropriately. But for all intents and purposes, that one is an informal complaint that can be handled at the operator level, unless you as a manager feel the need to elevate that to the grantee. Those formal complaints that are going to come in about the services that operators are providing or about hiring practices at the operator organizations, those types of complaints that are going to be formal and written, that are going to escalate up to the grantee level, you're definitely going to want to report those on to IDOT so that we can kind of follow the progress of those investigations. And more importantly, for certain types of complaints like civil rights complaints, we have to report those upward to the FTA, so we got to make sure we have a record of those as well. And then do PCOMs report all complaints received by the operator, the PCOM, both, who exactly they have to report on? And the long answer is please report all formal complaints regarding the transit program, regardless of which agency received the actual complaint. And that kind of goes without saying that there should be in place a formal complaint procedure that the operator has and that the grantee has. If customers or riders want to know how they file a complaint on an operator, they need to know how to do that. Who do they get in contact with? How do they have to transmit their complaint? Who's going to handle that complaint? What's the turnaround time on responding back to those who file a formal complaint? It's that kind of stuff that we've talked about previously during some of the PCOM trainings, but those are the types of things that you need to issue out to the writing public. And then the complaints themselves, whether it's received by the operator, received directly by the PCOM, or received at the grantee agency, doesn't matter. If it's a formal complaint that has to do with the transit program, the grantees should definitely know about it through the PCOM, and then the PCOMs are going to want to follow up with any investigations and resolutions, and definitely going to want to report that stuff up the chain to IDOT. Okay, so that's again, that's all we had question-wise from the previous sessions. So if we get any additional questions, I'll try to kind of include those in future sessions as well. That being said, let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to talk about now the Grant Funds Recovery Act, or the formerly SB 51 reporting requirement. As we stated earlier, this is a quarterly report that's due on all active grant agreements once a quarter. And we usually send out, we're required to send out an email that identifies the state grant number and contract number of the active grant that we're asking for information on. These are all for grant agreements executed after July 1st of 2010. You report only on the grant funding that you've received as of the end of that reporting period. Even if it's an active grant that you just executed a couple of weeks ago, and you haven't even incurred the first expense, doesn't matter. If it's an active open grant and was executed before the end of that particular reporting period, even if it was executed on the very last day of the reporting period, you will need to report on it. And in some instances, it may have been executed and you don't even have a copy of the executed agreement yet. We understand that. But we're going to need you to report on it nevertheless, even if the amount that you're reporting for the period is a zero. Just a couple things. I'm going to show the form real fast just so everybody knows exactly what we're looking at here. There are two different types of forms. There's an operating form, and that's not it. That's the capital form. There's an operating form and a capital form. We broke them down into those two different types of projects. Just kind of taking a very quick glance at the form itself, the blue areas are the areas that you're going to report on, or the areas that you're going to be responsible for filling out. The grantee name, kind of self-explanatory. The contract number, again, kind of self-explanatory. That's usually going to be a 4-digit number. That's going to be on the front page of your contract. And then the grant number. This I wanted to kind of clarify real fast. A lot of folks will put in the federal grant number in that area. That's actually incorrect. What we'll need you to report on in this particular area is the state grant number. And just for reference, the state grant number, these are just a couple of examples, the state grant number will look a little bit like what you see here. You see the examples I listed were JRC-15-001. That's an example of a JARC grant. OP-15-001. That's an example of a 5311 operating grant. CAP-13-1001-FED. That's an example of a a federal capital grant. And again, these are just examples, but that gives you a general idea of what we're looking for as far as that grant number is concerned. It does need to be the state grant number and not the federal grant numbers. Keep that in mind. The second part of that, moving on down the line there, grantee contact information. Sorry, I'm trying to switch back and forth between the normal pointer and my little spotlight here. Grantee contact information, this is the person that we need to contact at your location. This will, in 99.9% of the cases, be the PCOM. Grantee contact email, again, self-explanatory. How do we get in touch with that person? And then the date submitted. That's the date that you have submitted it to us or to your DIPIT project manager. The grant amount is the total amount of the award, the agreement award, and then the grant dollars expended to date is the total amount received from IDOT through the end of the reporting period. And if we go back and look again just at the presentation here, again we're talking right there. Grant dollars, grant amount is the amount of the award. Grant dollars expended, the total amount received through the end of the reporting period. It doesn't matter how much in multi-year grants. It won't necessarily matter how much you received in that particular fiscal year. That's not what we're asking about. We're not breaking it down to that level. We're saying the grant total amount, which is the total amount of the award, and then the amount that you've received throughout the life of that grant award up to the reporting date. One of the questions that came in on this particular form is, do you need to show the Fed after the OP 15-01? The answer there is no. Well, I mean, yes and no. If that FED acronym is included in your state grant number, you'll need to include the entire state grant number. So if the state grant number, for example, using the example of our OP 15-001, if there's a -FED behind that, then you'll include that as well. So whatever the entire federal grant, whatever the entire state grant number happens to look like, then that's what we'll want to use. And maybe I can pull one up real quick and just give you a general idea. Okay, here we go. This is an invoice. Never mind. Okay, so I'll look for one to pull up and give you an example here. Bear with me just 1 second. I'm going to find a good example for you. Okay, this number right here, this is the front page of a grant agreement. Contract number is that 4-digit number, kind of self-explanatory. State grant number is this number right here. This is a New Freedom grant that we're looking at. So it's this state grant number that actually goes in the grant number section of this form. I don't want to hammer this home too much. On the 5311, so we'll, okay, so that amount goes, sorry folks, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, not doing it too well. Again, that number goes right there in the grant number. That's the state grant number amount. Whatever that number reads, that's what goes there. Okay. Then the second form is the capital side of the reporting requirement, and the capital part, as you can see, is a little bit different, though pretty much the same. A little bit different, though pretty much the same. It just gives an example here of the same information: grantee name, contact number, or contract number, grant number, all of the same information. Then when you get down to the actual past the reporting period amount, I don't know if you folks can see this or not. When you get past the actual reporting period, where we get into activity, the capital projects need to know some specific information about how the project is progressing. So you need to complete this information as well. And you'll only get one of these if you received a capital grant award. Okay. Again, same situation as with everything. This is reported quarterly, as you can tell. And then included in the announcement of this particular requirement, again, we send out a preemptive email to everybody that identifies your state grant number and your contract number that we're requiring you report on. Included in that information you won't get will be a copy of the form itself. So you won't actually get a capital reporting form unless you have a capital grant contract. And included in that email will be the date that form and that report is due back to IDOT. And just to give an example, I'm going to use this one here from Tori. Thank you, Tori. Here's what the email actually looks like. I'm assuming, again, you folks can see this. Here's what the email actually looks like. It just gives a general idea of what it is that's expected. This is all kind of standard language. Don't pay any attention to the date. The date was wrong in this one. but it'll give the reporting period, whenever the last date of the reporting period was, your grant number, your contract number, the grant program, et cetera, et cetera. It's very straightforward, very self-explanatory. And again, that's going to be due. We'll let you know the due date on that when the email is sent. Okay, so shouldn't be too terribly difficult. If you have any questions, as usual, please feel free to discuss it with your project manager. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, once we get those reports back, we verify all of the information contained on the report, make sure that it's correct, and if it's correct, we go ahead and save it. If it's not correct, we reach back out to you and let you know that there was a discrepancy and that we need to kind of take a little closer look at things. So if you have any questions during that reporting process, please feel free to reach out to your DIPIT project manager. Okay. Okay. The public transportation and account reconciliation and service contract revenue form. These are pretty much the exact same form. For all intents and purposes, they are the same form, but they serve two different purposes. We are going to require that it's reported both quarterly and annually. And for the quarterly reporting, there is one included in the request for payment workbook that went out with the application and that has been sent out to most of the grantees since the executed contract. Again, it's a relatively self-explanatory form, but it serves two different purposes. The blue shaded areas, we're going to look at the form here in a second. The blue shaded areas are where you'll enter the information. Everything else is protected, and you shouldn't be messing with that information. It shouldn't be a problem. For quarterly, we want them to be completed by each provider, verified and aggregated by the PCOM. And that's where I say that it's the same form, but it serves two different purposes. In those systems that have multiple operators, each one of your operators that's providing public transportation service is going to need to fill out one of these forms. The PCOM will then gather all of those forms from the various different operators, verify all of the information, and then aggregate all of that information onto one form that they then in turn submit to IDOT with their request for payment. And then at the end of the year, as we'll see here in just a second, all of the information is aggregated in the master form, and that master form or that annual form will be submitted to IDOT as well. Just kind of backing up a second on the Grant Funds Recovery Act, we got a question in that asked if the maximum reimbursement included the maximum amount from the 5307. That's a great question. We do have several providers who provide both 5311 and 5307 services, and the answer to that question is this is reporting on information that is not 5307. So you're only going to be reporting on information, you're only going to be reporting on grants administered through the Department of Transportation, or DIPIT. Okay, so all of those 5307 grants, or for those of you that are direct recipients of other types of grant funding programs from the FDA, you're not going to be reporting on those. These are only programs that are administered by and overseen by IDOT or DIPIT. Okay, so thank you for that question. Okay, so back to the PTAs type stuff. Let me go ahead and bring the form up real quick so everybody can take a look at it. This is in essence what the form looks like. This is the master reconciliation form. Okay. As you can see here in the tabbed area, we have 5 different tabs, one for each quarter and a year-to-date summary. They're all the same information. They all look exactly alike. The difference is each one of these quarterly forms feeds into the year-to-date summary form. All right. So in the blue section is where you'll enter in your manual data entry amounts, and then all of that stuff will feed up to the year-to-date summary form. Okay. Here's where it can get a little bit tricky. One of the things that we're requiring is that operators report on all of the service contract revenue generated during the quarter. Whether they have to use that to meet the matching requirement or not is irrelevant. We need to make sure that all of the revenue generated using the 5311 project equipment is accounted for on this form. That's the one thing that we want to make sure all of the PCOMs are gathering and analyzing, and that they are then in turn reporting up the chain to IDOT for analysis. The second part of that is there is an area on there that will allow for circumstances where the grantee allows the operator to retain the monies that they've generated through service contracts for upcoming expenses on quarters moving forward. And if we look at the form, we'll be able to see down here, and sorry, let me bring up an actual data entry one. Sorry, we'll be able to see down here where there are some payments. These are some of the areas that we're going to gather. Payments received from the operator in a situation where, as an example, in quarter 2, the grantee allowed the operator to retain X number of dollars for financing expenses that were going to be coming up in quarter 3, and then at the end of quarter 3, the operator didn't quite use everything that they retained in quarter 2, so they would go ahead and pay back the amount that they didn't use. Now, I'm not saying that's a requirement. I'm just using this as an example. If that situation occurs, this is an area where you would enter any of those payments received from the operator. You'll be able to list all of the total expenses for the 5311 program, the DOPE program, if you have JARC and New Freedom, et cetera, so that you can calculate an amount that's required for meeting the local match requirements, and then it'll spit out a pre-calculated number down there for you. And then, sorry, let me get my little pointer back here. There we go. Okay. And then less the operator funding is box number 6 here is where we're talking about this gap financing. The amount that's retained by the operator for gap financing, the operator generates $20,000 in the quarter in service contract revenue, and they keep all $20,000. You would enter that amount of money here. Or in a situation where an operator actually requires some additional funding, and there is money available in the public transit account, you'll enter in the amount of money that you may have advanced to the operator to help them with expenses incurred in the upcoming quarters. And then it'll spit out at the end of that, at the end of all of that, it'll spit out a nice little ending balance here, and that ending balance will be whatever's left over in that account. And then there's signature blocks down here for the PCOM and for the operators themselves if you're using that. But this is the type of information that will be forwarded up on up to IDOT. And again, all of this information feeds into the master year-to-date summary. So at any point in time during the year, a PCOM can take a look at the total snapshot for the year to date and get a general idea where they stand on the financing. Again, this is the exact same form that is included in the 5311 request for payment workbook that's intended to be filled out by the operators, and then this master aggregated and forwarded on up to IDOT. So we talked about the gap financing, local match calculation. You enter in all of your total eligible expenses, less the project income, less any DOT program payments that you've received from either JARC, New Freedom, 5311, DOPE, et cetera, et cetera. Any capital expenditures that you made, all of your public transportation account funding is available. All of that local match revenue that you don't use is available for use in purchasing transit-related equipment, anything that you might need. And then any advances that we talked about, either whether you're advancing the operator any gap financing or whether it's a retention of any earned revenue from any of those service contracts, all of that information will be entered in there and then moved forward. And then the ending balance will transfer as a beginning balance for the following quarter. So annually, the year-to-date sheet will auto-populate like we talked about. Ending balance of the fourth quarter must match the ending balance on the year-to-date sheet. The form must be prepared by the PCOM, reviewed and approved by the grantee's certifying authority before forwarded on to IDOT for reporting. And that's true of any form where we require a signature. And we have to make sure, and this is part of our work as project managers, we have to make sure that everything that we receive from operators and from grantees has been signed off on by the certifying authority. Now, in some instances, that certifying authority is the board chairman. In other instances, it may be a different person, like a county administrator or something along those lines. That's what the board resolution does for us. It tells us whose signature we're supposed to look for whenever this kind of stuff comes in. This public transportation reconciliation form and the service contract revenue generating form, no different. We're gonna look for the signatures, the certifying signatures on those forms, just as we would everything else. And if it comes to us without that certifying signature, or with a signature other than that of the person granted the authority in the board resolution, then we're probably going to send it back and make sure that it's sent on up the signature line as it should have been. Okay. And again, there aren't a whole lot of questions about that. There haven't been any questions come in about that, so we're going to go ahead and move on then to the PCOM quarterly report. Again, as I said earlier, we're kind of flying through this, so hopefully it's not going over everybody's head or in one ear and out the other. But this is all stuff that we've covered a couple times now. It shouldn't be new to too terribly many folks. And obviously, if it is, you can always contact me directly, and I can walk you through any of these forms. It won't be a problem. Same thing with the DIPIT project managers. They'll be glad to help walk you through any of the forms that we talk about today. The PCOM quarterly report, again, this is a brand new form. First of all, let me back up a second. This is a brand spanking new form. We're requiring it to be used with this recently passed first quarter of FY15 and all subsequent quarters moving forward. It's a narrative summary of the 5311 activity, not just of the PCOM activity and everything that the PCOM did directly, but just 5311 activity in general. We're going to ask for a few statistics here and there, but primarily it's about activity outside of what's already being collected as part of the request for payment workbook. We're going to ask about coordination meetings, any new initiatives that are being undertaken by the operator or the grantee as it relates to public transportation. For example, we have an operator who is holding fundraisers for the public transportation program. Wonderful idea. It's a very good community engagement process. That's something that we would see outlined in the PCOM quarterly report. Any public input meetings. There's a public input requirement for construction projects. We enforce a public input requirement for service changes to the 5311 program. And again, we can talk at length about those one-on-one if there's a need for any of that. Suffice it to say, anytime you're going to spend federal funding in your area or anytime you're going to significantly change your 5311 operating parameters, you'll want to contact us first so that we can advise you whether or not you need to go through the public input process. Any of those public input meetings that you hold or that you attend as a result, you're going to want to outline those here. And then PCOM meetings. These trainings, for example, would be outlined in your PCOM quarterly report. If you've attended a conference, either DIPIT sponsored or IDOT sponsored or transit related or just in general, any conferences that you think have bearing or an impact on the transportation program, you'll want to report on those as well. We ask about service contract activity. We ask about the total contract amount and the amount collected for the month. Now, this is a little bit different than the service contract revenue generation form and the public transportation account reconciliation form we already talked about. As we talked about on those forms, it's the amount that you collect in revenue, whether you use it to meet your local match or not. We want to know about that. For this particular report, we're going to ask you to report on service contract activity. That basically says any service contract activity. Just as an example, we executed a service contract with the Acme Human Service Organization for $20,000 for the upcoming fiscal year. Didn't collect on anything, so obviously there wouldn't be a record of that on the service contract revenue generation form or on the public transit reconciliation form. But here in the PCOM quarterly report, we're going to want to know, yes, in fact, we have that service contract that we just now created. It's worth $20,000 to us, and it's there and it's ready to go. Whether or not you've actually collected anything from it or provided any kind of trips under that contract, we can look at later. But at this point in time, all we're looking at is for information on that contract in general. And the narrative, a narrative about the efforts to generate service contracts or local revenue. Again, one of our counties, one of our providers out there is doing a lot of fundraising. They may not necessarily have held any fundraisers during a specific reporting period, but they might have 6 or 8 of them coming up in the next reporting period. We want to know about that. They may have spent a lot of time planning through planning meetings or steering committee meetings or something along those lines, planning for those upcoming fundraisers. We're going to want to know about that as well. So anything that you got that PCOMs are doing or operators are doing or grantees, anybody to generate those service contracts or to generate that local revenue, we're going to want you to detail those efforts as well. And then any complaints, as we talked about earlier, it's those official type of complaints where we have a documented investigation and resolution to them. Whether it was received by the grantee and or the operator, doesn't matter. Who investigated it? How was it resolved? Was it customer service related or was it service related? Was it employment related? I forgot that bullet point. I apologize. What exactly was the nature of the complaint? Who investigated it? And how was it resolved? Those are the primary criteria that we're kind of looking at. So we're going to want a definite list of those. And then we're going to ask about trip denials. Now, we've kind of been over this one several times. What exactly is a trip denial? That's just basically a declined ride. We've given the definition, the official definition of a trip denial. That's 60 minutes before or after the time that's requested. If you can accommodate within that 60-minute before or after window, it's not considered a denial. If you cannot accommodate outside of that 60-minute window, whether you can provide the ride or not at a different time, if it's outside of that 60-minute window, you're going to record it as a denial. And then we've got a couple different categories of denials, where it's a straight out denied, no trip was provided, or whether it's a denied but provided, where we were able to provide the trip although it was outside of that 60-minute window. And then we want to record in both instances the reason for the denial. Well, what was it about the initial request that we could not accommodate? This is something that's required by everybody who's providing fixed route service. That affects only 3 of our Section 5311 grant recipients. But we here in DIPIT decided that after kind of looking at everything, we felt it was a pretty useful service analysis tool that allows you to identify where you might have some gaps in service and then make some effective changes using that information. So that's why we decided to go ahead and make it mandatory regardless of the type of service that you're providing. So in your PCOM quarterly report, you'll list all of those trip denials. Sorry, let me back up a second. Now I'm going to show you the form. Here's what your PCOM quarterly report form looks like. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. There isn't a whole lot to it. It's only 8 pages, and one of those pages is a cover page. So it's a very, very easy form. Section 1 right here is a list of your public transportation coordination meetings, basically the types of meetings or activities that you, the PCOM, are undertaking. Did you go to a coordination meeting? Did you have 3 or 4 fundraising planning meetings? Did you attend a conference, this month or last month or during the reporting period? How about your operators? Were your operators out there engaging in coordination activities? Were they attending conferences? What were representatives from your operating agencies doing as far as just community engagement for transportation purposes, et cetera, et cetera? Definitely going to want to know that type of activity. And again, sorry, I think that first one was just the grantee and the operators. The second one there was the PCOMs. What meetings did the PCOMs attend that particular quarter? I think it's kind of duplicative, but I think we want it separated out so we can see what the PCOMs are doing, and then we can see what everybody involved with the transportation program is doing up top there. The next page, again, this is the service contract form, and I think we're going to update this a little bit to make these sections a little bit clearer. I apologize for that. We'll get another revised form out to you as quickly as possible. In the meantime, you can go ahead and use this form. It's not going to change very much. This is the service contract information that we talked about. Who's the operator that's providing the contract? Who's the organization or agency that you've entered into a contract with? What type of contract? How much was the amount that the contract itself is for, the total amount? And then how much was collected for that particular quarter? I'm definitely going to make sure you fill out that information as completely as possible. The next page, and I know it might seem a little bit duplicative, but it does serve yet another function here in DIPIT for analysis purposes over what the service contract revenue page serves in the RFP and over what the public transportation reconciliation form serves at the PCOM level. So it's a little bit different. This one is the box where you will input your efforts to generate service contracts or to generate local revenue. And we'll definitely want to know, we give some tips here. I don't know if you can read that or not. Let me blow it up a little bit. We give some tips on what type of information are we looking for specifically. Were your efforts successful to generate revenue? If they were, let's hear about the successes. If they weren't, what obstacles did you happen to encounter along the way? Why is it that you believe the efforts were not necessarily successful? If you didn't seek any service contracts in the quarter, why not? What is it that kept you from doing that, or you know, what prevented you from kind of reaching out to various agencies, et cetera, et cetera? That's where you input that information. Someone asked if I can give an example of the different types of service contracts. Absolutely. Then thank you for the question. It's a very good question. We have, I would say probably the most common type of service contract that I've encountered over the years has been the contract with a local agency that provides a workshop for developmentally disabled consumers in the community. And they need transportation to go from various either individual homes or independent living facilities into the workshop in the morning, and then from the workshop out to those various residences in the afternoon. That's one type of contract. That would be like a DD workshop type of a contract. Another type of service contract, excuse me, another type of service contract might be a Head Start, or similar to a Head Start type of a contract, where we provide transportation to school-age children for after-school programs. In that instance, it's going to be slightly different set of service parameters. So that would be one type of a contract. There are exclusive service contracts where we take a vehicle and in essence we take it out of revenue service. It's not technically out of revenue service, but we take it out of general public demand response service and dedicate the entire vehicle to a specific service contract. And so we'll want to know that's an exclusive type of a contract in essence. And then there are other program transportation type service contracts with senior centers or places like that. So again, it just depends on the type of service that is being asked, first of all. Secondly, this is where the information I think is even more important. When I look at the type of service contract, I want to know whether or not the service is being paid for on a per trip basis, a flat rate basis, a per mile basis, or a per hour basis. That to me is the type that I'm primarily concerned with. Do you have a contract that reimburses you per hour of service? I'd want to know that. It's an hourly contract. Do you have a contract that reimburses you per trip? It is a per trip contract. And then I would want to know what the total amount is. Some type of information in that type of contract field that lets me know how the amount of the contract is calculated, or how it is that you're billing or you're calculating how much you're going to collect from that particular agency, something along those lines. So I hope that was helpful. If not, then I'll try to type up some kind of better examples and get that out to everybody as well. So let's see. Okay, here we go. We talked about efforts to obtain additional service contracts and generate local revenue. Again, I I will preach this until my dying professional breath, and if Mr. Ed Heflin is on the call, which I'm pretty sure that he is, he too would preach the same virtues of the service contracts. We continually talk about how important local revenue is, how important just generating that local match is, even if you don't necessarily have to use it, even if you don't have the need. If DOPE covers all of your local match requirements, that's wonderful and fantastic, and way to go, State of Illinois, for helping out. But that does not absolve the grantees or the operators of their responsibility to engage the community and to try to generate some local revenue. More importantly, that local revenue that's not used to meet the matching requirement is a very helpful tool in funding your program in between reimbursements, and then more importantly in acquiring assets to help the program moving forward without the need or the delay of grant funding. So definitely, not only are we going to continue to preach that virtue, but now we're going to ask you to report on that type of activity. What did you do? If you didn't do anything, why didn't you do it? If you weren't successful in what you did, what do you think led to that lack of success, and what can you do moving forward? What lessons did you learn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where you'll report that type of information. Okay. The next on the list there is any complaints. Excuse me, any of the complaints. This is where we talk about the complaint. What type of a complaint was it? Customer service, no shows, no rides. Again, we're talking about formal complaints, et cetera, et cetera. And then here's kind of where I want to talk a little bit about just that complaint process in general. We talked about the need for everyone to have an official complaint procedure, outlining who customers need to call or who they need to send a letter to if they have a complaint. That is not to say that we are to dismiss or that we are encouraging the dismissal of the Mary Jo rider who complains that John Driver is, turning corners too fast and braking too hard, et cetera, et cetera. These are the types of things that you as a PCOM or you as the grantees are still going to want to kind of take note of. Maybe not necessarily to the extent of formally logging and documenting and investigating all of those different types of complaints, but you're still going to want to kind of take notice of them, because if the complaints continue, or if you see a consistent type of complaint coming in about either a type of driver, a type of service, if you start to see these patterns, and I'm not articulating it very well, but over time you start to see patterns just in transit operations in general. As you start to see these patterns, you may want to take a little bit more formal action on an informal type of a complaint. If we get a lot of complaints about the attitudes of a specific driver, or the way a specific driver is conducting themselves while they're out there on the road, a formal complaint with a signature from a rider may never actually come in to address that issue. But if enough of them come in about the same driver or the same issue, then you'll definitely kind of want to take notice of that and maybe take a more formal approach, or at a minimum have your operator management team kind of pay attention to that and be aware of it, so that they can take some preventative measures. Nevertheless, we're just going to want some information on the types of complaints that you're receiving here, and then how they were resolved. This is where we get to the next one. The last page here, I think this is the last page, second to last page. This next section here talks about the fully described complaint, the documented complaint. What type of a complaint was it? Customer service? Was it ride related? Was it just service related in general? Was it a complaint from an employee about that employer? What type of complaint was it? How was it handled? Who researched it? Who investigated it? Excuse me. Who investigated it? Who documented it? What was the resolution? Was the resolution satisfactory to the complainant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the questions came in is, could a complaint come in that someone in the community has about something they saw in the community? And that's kind of a little bit of a vague question, but if I can try to answer it as best I can, if someone in your community, even though they may not necessarily ride the bus or use the service that you're providing, but somebody in the community sent in a complaint about something they witnessed that is related to the transportation program, or something that they feel the transportation program negatively impacted as a result of this type of activity or action, then obviously you're going to want to investigate that as well. Again, obviously we're not going to want to get a complaint that says, you know, I mean, let me rephrase that. Some complaints are going to require a little bit more investigation and tact than others. We will invariably receive the complaint that says the buses are too white. We don't like the way the white buses look. Okay, that's a valid complaint, and then we understand everybody has their different preferences. How you handle those complaints, however, needs to kind of be the same across the board. Sometimes the resolution may be, we appreciate your input, you know, however, you know, this is what we feel is the best thing to do. We're just, again, if it's a formal complaint, we're going to want to know about that, or if you see a pattern of informal complaints, we're going to want to know about that as well. In this window that we're talking about right here, this is where you'll log that type of stuff. And again, we've given some hints about the type of information that we're looking at and the way that we would like to see any complaints summarized here in this particular form. And then the last section, make sure this is the last. Okay, last section is the trip denials. How many rides were declined in the quarter? What were the top 3 reasons for trip denials? Use additional space as you need to. You can submit your trip denial log as support documentation for that, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to want to see that you as a PCOM, and more importantly, your operators as transit managers and you know, responsible operators in general, that they're logging the information, obviously because it's required, but more importantly that they're looking at it, that they're analyzing it, and that they are communicating it with you, the grantee, the PCOM standing in the shoes of the grantee, you, the grantee, and that the PCOM is taking note of that, and then that although we, DIPIT, won't oversee this process, the inference here, the implication here is that the PCOMs are going to begin some dialogue with the operators about the trip denials. What can we do about those? Are you, the PCOM, and we, DIPIT, are we seeing a consistent reason for trip denials? And then if we do see a consistent reason for trip denials, how have we addressed that root cause for these particular denials? I'm not saying we, DIPIT, or you, the PCOMs, are going to have all the answers because that's just, I don't think, realistic. But what we do want to see, and what we are encouraging, is the dialogue about trip denials, why they're happening, and then some analysis and implementation for how we can address some of those root causes. You know, what types of successes can we encounter now based on the denials that we're seeing now? And then this last little section here is just, again, some information on what the requirements are. It's a quarterly report. We also have annual reports with the fourth quarter actual requisition information that has to come in. Just a summary of all public transportation meetings, coordination meetings, any activities, initiatives, all of that stuff. This is all stuff we talked about up top earlier. A list of contracts, service contracts, any additional information that we ask for, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's self-explanatory, though I know it's a new form, and to some of you, this may be the very first time you're hearing about it, period. And I understand that, and I can certainly respect that. But it's the first kind of toe in the water, so to speak, for having the PCOMs report activity and information up to DIPIT, and then DIPIT receive the information to kind of analyze it and see what effective conclusions we can draw, and then what other initiatives we can implement, or what other materials we can supply that will kind of address some root causes. And I guess I don't know if this is the case or not. Was everybody able to see the actual form? I guess a couple folks were saying it was just kind of stuck on PowerPoint. They didn't actually get to see the form. I hope I was showing you my screen and not just my PowerPoint presentation. nevertheless, it's all right there. Everybody got a copy of the form. Everybody got a copy of the presentation. Everybody got a copy of all the forms that we talked about today. So if at any point in time you have any of those types of questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or the DIPIT staff. The question came in is, when do you need to start submitting the quarterly reports? Those are going to be due this month. All of our quarterly reports are due within 30 days of the close of the quarter, with the exception of the grant funds or the SB 51 report. In that particular instance, the SB 51 report is due by the due date specified in the announcement email. We will specify a date when we send you the report. Other than that, all of the other reports are due within 30 days of the close of the quarter. So our quarter closed on September 30th. That means that these reports will all be due in by October 30th. If for whatever reason you're not going to meet that October 30th deadline, please reach out to your DIPIT project manager and let that person know that you're aware that the requirement exists. However, you're not going to be able to meet that requirement, and then of course give them a reason why you cannot meet that requirement. Will they be sent electronically to the PCOM? All of the PCOM should already have a copy of these reports. They were included in the announcement email that I sent out about today's session on Monday, I believe it was. But just to kind of back up and reiterate all of that, we'll have the project manager send out a copy of all of these reports. Once again, we'll have them do that by the end of this week. That way we'll make sure everybody has a copy of everything. That being said, it doesn't appear as though we have any additional questions. As always, my contact information is at the very top of the thing. There we go. My contact information is right there on the very front page of the presentation. Everybody who got my email, if you got my presentation, my contact information is on there. Everyone should know who their DIPIT project manager is. As always, if you have any questions about these forms, this program, this initiative, anything in general that might crop up, please feel free to reach out to us. We're much better at answering questions when they're actually asked rather than after the fact. So please definitely reach out. Somebody asked if you'll be able to download the slides. I don't have them available anywhere for download, but again, I will definitely email them out. I did email them out to everybody. I can email them again. If you didn't get a copy of them originally but would like a copy, shoot me an email and I will be glad to forward them on to you. Okay, that being said, we don't have any additional questions, and I pretty much think we're done for today. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, one more thing. We did record the session, and we are going to make this session available on a YouTube channel. I will send out an email to everyone that has a link to the YouTube channel when I'm able to post the actual presentation. And then also I will send out a link to a survey asking you, how helpful the information was, what, if any, just same type of a survey we had the last time. Just some various questions about the presentation itself, and then I'm going to ask if you have any input on what we can do differently, or what you would like to see happen in the future. This is the time that I encourage you to be absolutely candid, because they are completely and totally anonymous. I don't have any idea who submitted anything. So if you want to say, I can't stand John Edmondson's nasally voice, please have somebody else do the presentation, then this is the time to say stuff like that, because it will be taken seriously. We do look at them, and we do try to adjust. As everybody knows, this program is kind of in its infancy, so this information is helpful as we try to adjust how we make the presentations and what we cover, et cetera, et cetera. So please feel free to be brutally honest and get that information into me when you can. So Once again, I want to thank everybody for your time today. I appreciate it. Look for a couple of emails from me containing all the information that we talked about. And as always, reach out if you have any questions. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.